I'm joined today by the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus and my colleagues in the Senate, Curran Price, my colleagues in the Senate, Ted Lieu and Leland Yee. And this morning we had an adjourn in memory for Trayvon Martin, and our concern was that justice be done in this case. The chief of police dismissed any investigation. He has since stepped down temporarily. We hope that that's made permanent. The state attorney had an obligation to do an investigation. He too was recalcitrant in his responsibilities. The federal government has since stepped in, and the upside of that is that there's a chance that we get justice. But I mentioned on the floor that particularly those of us who were African-American males of the 50s era, we were kind of brought up in the shadow of Emmett Till. And the younger people today don't know about Emmett Till, but that occurred in 1955 in Mississippi in August. And Emmett Till allegedly whistled at a white woman in Mississippi. And what took place after that was that the town literally lynched this young man. His eyes were poked out. He was beaten. He was thrown in a river with a cotton gin around his neck. They found him several days later. They had a mock trial. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. In fact, one of the jurors commented that it would have been less than that, except they took time out to drink a pop. We don't want to see that occur in 2012 with a young man like Trayvon Martin. The 911 called when it came through. The 911 operator said, "You should not follow him." The rules for the neighborhood watch that Mr. Zimmerman was a part of say that you shouldn't carry a gun, that you shouldn't try to apprehend a suspect, that you shouldn't follow a suspect. There was no evidence that Trayvon Martin was guilty of anything. He was not acting suspiciously. He claimed that he had a broken nose and that his head was bleeding and that he suffered injuries. But there was videotape released today from his arrest when he was taken into custody shortly afterward. First, he was not taken to the hospital, and the video clearly shows that there was no injury to Mr. Zimmerman. So we pray that the Justice Department and Attorney General Holder will investigate this matter and move forward with all deliberate speed to make sure that justice is done. As we were saying on the floor earlier, that in 2012, we can't have the repeat of an Emmett Till. Certainly the young people today may not know of Emmett Till, but they do know of Trayvon Martin. We're wearing hoodies because, again, God forbid that in the United States, that wearing a hoodie makes you guilty of a crime subject to the death penalty. God forbid that we say that if a woman had on a pair of denim jeans or a skirt that was revealing, that she's subject to be raped, or that if a man has on a turban, or whatever your attire might be, that allows you to be the subject of discriminatory activity. That's our challenge today. We seek justice. We don't know all of the facts, but the state of Florida has an obligation, and the United States Justice Department has an obligation to make sure that justice is done in this case. I see my colleague from the Assembly. He probably snuck away. I want to give him an opportunity to say something before they come and get him, because in that house, the sergeants will come drag you back. Ladies and gentlemen, Assemblyman Steve Bradford.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Wright, and I'm honored to join my colleagues in both the Senate and the Assembly in adjourning and recognizing the tragic death of Trayvon Martin. Though I didn't personally know him, nor is he a constituent of mine, I know thousands of Trayvon Martins. I know thousands of African-American and Latino young men and boys who are victimized every day in America simply because of the color of their skin. They're arrested more, they're kicked out of school more, they're sentenced to jail more, and they're even sentenced to death more. I'm here to ask the question of why. Why in America, almost 150 years after slavery, is an African American's life not valued at the same level as their white counterpart? I'm here to ask the question of how. How can a young man with nothing more than candy in his hand and a soft drink, be gunned down, and now be accused of causing his death simply by what he was wearing. The same hoodie that Bill Belichick wears every Sunday on the sidelines of an NFL football game. Why isn't he menacing? Why isn't he threatening? Why is it safe for him to wear it and not African Americans and Latinos? We need to ask those questions. We need answers. It's time to realize that when people say it's not about race, I've lived long enough to know when they say it's not about race, it's usually about race. If the roles were reversed, I assure you there would be an African American in jail right now facing possibly the death penalty. So I'm here to stand with my colleagues and bring attention to the need to bring justice, not only for Trayvon Martin, but all the young men and women of color who are constantly victimized daily in this country simply because of the color of their skin.
I'm going to ask my Senate colleague from my neighboring district, the Honorable Ted Lieu.
You know, every day in America, members of the minority community are targeted, and every now and then they get killed. And all of us here bring our own personal experiences, and I am reminded of when Vincent Chin was killed in Detroit because he was Asian American. And while I don't agree with their sentence in that case, at least Vincent Chin got a trial. All we're asking for here is that at least there be a trial. There's enough conflicting evidence, I think, for a reasonable judge or jury to make a determination that Trayvon Martin was murdered. But at the very least, there should be some proceeding where the facts can come out. I don't see how you can look at this case and simply decide that the person acted in self-defense. There's enough evidence that the person did not. And without a proceeding to look at the facts, the folks in Florida have already made a decision that somehow this death was justified. I don't see how they can get to that conclusion unless, frankly, they were racist. And at the very minimum, we are calling here for at least a proceeding for the facts to come out, because on the face of it, this is not acceptable. Thank you.
I had another Assembly colleague who was able to get away from the 47th Assembly District in Los Angeles, the Honorable Holly Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Senator. And let me just say the Assembly is still in session, and so we have colleagues who are trying to come here to join us, members of our leadership, members of the Latino Women's Caucus, Asian Pacific Islander Caucus will be joining us as soon as they can. This tragic case has given us a unique opportunity as Californians, as Americans, as mothers and fathers, to have the broader conversation about race in America. I'm the mother of a young man, not born in Mississippi or Alabama, but in California, of a young man born in Y2K, the year of the new millennium of new technology, not in 1958. And that young man and I had to sit down and have a conversation this weekend, and I had to explain to him what the word coon meant. Never in my wildest imagination or the imagination of my parents did anyone think that in 2012, a black woman in California, not Alabama or Mississippi, would have to tell a young man born in California in the year 2000 what the word coon meant and why he needed to know it and why he needed to understand how he could be perceived by simply walking his dog in the park, as he often does, in the cold winter climate of Sacramento, with his hood up over his asthmatic, allergy-ridden self. Who would imagine? And so while the details of this case will hopefully come to fruition, thank you for joining us, Mr. Speaker, we have a responsibility as mothers and fathers, as Californians, to talk about in our very own state how race matters and what we are going to do in our homes, in our churches, in our communities, in the legislature, to talk about race in an informative, educational, unbiased, instructive way. So perhaps my son, in 15 plus years, won't have to sit down with his son, born in the new millennium, in California, not in Alabama, Florida, or Mississippi, and have a conversation about hoodies and Skittles and Arizona tea or the word coon.
We're joined by the Speaker of the California State Assembly from Los Angeles, the Honorable John Perez.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to come and reinforce the important message of the day, that we have much more work to do to create a society that is free of all of our historic challenges that are intertwined in the question of race. The killing of Trayvon Martin really raises so many questions for us all, and we have to rededicate ourselves to this broader question of how we as a society, not just we as legislators, but how we as a society move past these difficult questions to create the kind of society we all seek. This is clearly a very difficult time for the Martin family, but is it a difficult time for families across this country? It has reinforced fears that so many parents have when their kids leave home at night. Fears that should never have to be there, but for the reality of the challenges for so many people in this country. So I want to thank everybody here for their leadership and bringing us together to continue to work on this challenging question.
Please welcome the Assemblyman from the 52nd Assembly District in the southeastern part of Los Angeles County, the Honorable Isidore Hall.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, members. I am outraged of the lack of movement that has obviously taken place with this case. The fact that you would have the unmitigated gall to question whether or not an investigation should move forward is unthinkable. The BMWs of our society is real. What is the BMW of our society? It's black men walking in America. That has obviously caused a threat. It's a threat that has been elevated and continues to be elevated and demonstrated through violence, as you saw in Florida. This is a challenge that we are faced with each and every day of our lives. I see it in Compton. I see it in South Los Angeles. I see it in Paramount. I see it in Linwood. And as Holly Mitchell said, Member Mitchell said, this is something that we now have to explain to our kids and our nephews, our young boys in our community, even more now today than ever before. When at a point you have an African-American president, and yet we're still dealing with the BMWs and the targeting of BMWs in our community is an outrage. And so, yes, we must work, and we must continue to work. And we must hold every level of the justice system and electeds accountable, not just in Florida, but in America, across this land, until we begin to lift the question of race and deal with the question of race and make sure that we let everyone know that this is our land. This is the people of America's land, and everyone has a seat at the table for justice and equality. Thank you so much.
Last but certainly not least, the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, my colleague from the 26th Senate District in Los Angeles, the Honorable Curran Price.
Thank you, Senator Wright, and my legislative colleagues. I'm just, well, first of all, I'm proud to stand with my colleagues as we really underscore the unacceptable behavior of the authorities in Florida. And it really has become a teaching moment because notwithstanding so-called progress, we have a president, we had an African-American who even chaired the Senate session today, but we still have real problems. And the fact that a kid with a hood with some Skittles and some Arizona tea is dead because he was a suspect is just totally unacceptable. And we can't stand for it. And so I'm proud that my colleagues have taken a stand, not just on the floor, but in their communities as well, and that we continue to spread the message that we have to have equality. It's just no other way. Black men are at risk in our society, and especially young black men. And there are kids, there are relatives, there are neighbors. And unless they can be safe, we can't be safe. So again, we stand in solidarity. We hope that the authorities will move quickly and expeditiously in bringing the person responsible to justice. I think it's significant that the response, our response here and around the country has been measured but in outrage. We understand that there is a lot at stake, and we don't want to fall into the hands of those who would have this be a moment of explosive violence. Violence it is, but it's something that we have to work with, we have to control, and we have to demand that all levels of government are respectful, are mindful of the responsibility of holding the trust, but more importantly of make sure that maintaining the kind of standards and ideals that we know are so important in our country. And so thank you for your presence today.
While we're all here, we've opened for questions if there are any that you may have. Yes, sir.
There was a video yesterday that showed the moment when he was brought in by the police, and there have been reports that Zimmerman suffered a broken nose, bloody face, but then you saw the video, that didn't seem to be the case. And also there was what looked like to be a very kind of relaxed atmosphere with the police and the way they dealt with him. Could you just describe what you felt when you saw that and what that indicates to you?
But I think my colleagues raised that. Okay, my colleagues raised that as well. I mean, if you had been an African American arrested in Florida under a similar circumstance as that, it would not have been the cordial experience that you saw Mr. Zimmerman having. If your nose was broken, you wouldn't have just walked through and had a happy smile on your face, and you wouldn't have walked through. There clearly were no bruises that were visible from the video, and it did not appear that he had a broken nose or required medical attention. The last time I checked, someone with a broken nose would have probably been taken to the hospital before they were just taken and walked through. But that evidence was not reviewed by the state attorney or the police chief before he simply accepted Mr. Zimmerman's word that this was a matter of self-defense and that he was attacked, which again adds to much of the outrage that many of us feel, because aside from having the body of Trayvon Martin, here you have a man who didn't go to the hospital apparently and did not seem to require medical attention when he was arrested.
Senator, yesterday when we talked, you said you wouldn't wear the hoodies on the floor. You would wait until after.
Okay, I'm going to, if you'll give me just a second, I want to recognize the chair of the Latino Caucus who also managed to get away, so we're kind of taking them in and letting them have an opportunity. The chair of the Latino Caucus, Assemblyman Ricardo Lara.
Thank you. It's definitely an honor to be here, not only as the new chair of the Latino Caucus, but to stand in solidarity with my brothers and sisters from the API Caucus, African American Black Caucus, to stand here to talk about this tremendous tragedy. We are here in the legislature today celebrating Cesar Chavez Day, and a man who epitomized peace and not violence. And in a day in these days that we live in, where the color of your skin constitutes you being gunned down, reminds us of the need to reassess our race relations in this country. And so we stand here in solidarity with the Black Caucus. We will do everything we can in our power in terms of seeing if there's any policies or legislative action that we have to take to ensure that this doesn't happen. But just to let the family of the victim know that they're not alone. We stand with them, and us as Latinos in this state who have also suffered numerous amounts of hate crimes because of the color of our skin or because of what we look like, are here to say that enough is enough. Thank you.
I'm not sure whose BlackBerry that is that's near a microphone. We had that discussion earlier. Please welcome my colleague also from the Los Angeles County South Bay area, the Honorable Warren Fiorentani.
Thank you very much, Senator Wright. I'm Assemblymember Warren Fiorentani. I'm also chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. We have 11 members in the legislature. I think it's really important that we stand together around this issue. In this particular case, what we're talking about is a young man that happens to be African American, but we can all make our own list relative to victims of hate crimes, unfortunately. We stand together to make a very simple message be heard very loud and clear. I know there's much discussion and there's back and forth, there's tweeting, there's all kinds of comments being made in the press. This should not be done in the press. This should be done in a court of law. And in looking at this issue, having this 1 month pass without charges being brought against this individual for shooting an unarmed young man, people can talk about schoolyard fights, about who started it, what happened. This person killed another person that was unarmed, and he followed him down the street. All of the basic information is there. We call on that this person be charged and that we look at this issue in a court of law rather than in the media or other places, because this is where this needs to be adjudicated. A crime has been committed. It should be dealt with in the law, and he should be charged, and that should take place. We in our caucus stand not with the African American caucus and the Latino caucus and our other caucuses because we're ethnic caucuses. We stand with them as human beings, sisters and brothers in the human family who are no longer going to stand for this kind of killing and hate crimes that's going on in this country. Thank you.
You had a question. I'm gonna take yours, and then I'm going to recognize Asomani Monalejo.
All right, so when we spoke yesterday, you told me you weren't going to wear the hoodies on the Senate floor. You
Well,
said you
when-
were going to wait until the press conference. Why did you make the decision to wear it, and
Well,
when did you make
well, no, we weren't going to wear it during the session. What we did was, again, to recognize the decorum in our House, we waited until the adjourn in memory portion of the session, which was the appropriate time we felt to wear the hoodie in memory of Trayvon. We did not want to disrupt the Senate session, and there was no attempt to try to circumvent the rules of the House. And so what we did was we had an agreement with our Rules Committee that at the time that we were doing the presentation, that we would then don the hoodie in memory of Trayvon, so that we were able to have the memorial that we wanted for Trayvon and have the coexistence of the business of the House. Any other questions? Well, let me recognize from, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Mr. Wright, at what point did you decide that there was enough evidence coming out of Florida to take this very public stand?
You know, I got to tell you, the young people really drove this for me. And I can remember years ago when I included myself as the young people, but there's a word when you have grandkids that you don't get to call yourself that anymore. But as my own children and my grandchildren and children in my district began asking me, what do you do about this? And initially I thought, okay, well, Florida's going to work this out. And then as I spoke to my congressional colleagues, and I was listening to what they were doing, and I saw Jesse Jackson, who I used to work for, and Al Sharpton and the NAACP, and I saw people moving into Florida, recognizing that I didn't have the opportunity to get to Florida to participate. It occurred to me that here in Sacramento, where I do work and I do have a leadership role, that I had an obligation to make sure to lift my voice. And let me say as well that when we spoke to the other caucuses of color, there was no reservation about whether or not they would participate. So whether or not it was the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, the Latino Caucus, the Women's Caucus, to a person, they all said, we'll join with you, the Legislative Black Caucus, in this effort.
But did you reach a comfort level with what evidence was available to step forward?
Well, I got to tell you, the 911 call where the 911 operator was saying to Mr. Zimmerman, Are you following him? Stop, don't do that. That was fairly compelling for me, because what was clear at that point was that Mr. Zimmerman had the presence to call the 911 operator, and there was no threat clear that you could see because he felt comfortable enough to call. You heard no voice in the background at that time. So what was clear at that point was that everything that took place subsequent to his 911 call, when he was asked not to follow Trayvon Martin, becomes his fault in my view, because he initiated the contact, so that even if there were, for example, a fight that ensued that he claims that he lost, he initiated the contact. That's not, even in my understanding and reading of the Florida Stand Your Ground statute, it doesn't mean that you can chase down the person. Stand your ground means if he'd have stood his ground, Trayvon Martin would have gone his way, and Mr. Zimmerman would still be there, and they'd both be alive today. But in his choice of how to pursue it caused the life of that young man, I believe, and that's what a court of law should find. Yes, sir.
Congressman Bobby Rush, as you know, was ejected from the House of Representatives chambers yesterday for wearing a hoodie during the session. I
Yes.
just wanted to get your thoughts on that, since your display today sort of echoes that, but you've expressed that you approach it with a little bit more restraint in regard for the rules of the chamber.
I mean, I don't know all. I mean, I saw the CNN display that occurred with Congressman Rush, and I know him from Chicago. We did a couple of things because, again, I have a great deal of respect for the Senate to which I was elected. One of the things that we did was we actually conferred with our Rules Committee in advance, so we didn't show up in surprise the leadership of our House what we were doing. So we actually had a bipartisan discussion that we were going to have a memorial for Trayvon Martin today. Again, I have a great deal of respect for the Senate. There was no attempt by any of us in the Senate or the Assembly to kind of sort of stage a demonstration. One of the reasons for that is I'm a member of the Senate, and so I feel that it's my obligation and it's my duty to use that forum in a manner to which it was intended to be used. I don't know that Mr. Rush was not granted that opportunity. I don't know what he attempted to do in order to gain the microphone. I dare say, though, that if it were a challenge that we had where we were denied what I believe would have been our rights under the rules of the Senate, we might have had a different kind of discussion. But again, I credit, Speaker Perez, I credit Speaker, Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, I credit Assembly Member Conway and Senator Huff, because, and again, in a bipartisan fashion, we did what we believe was the best utilization of the House that we all serve in and have a great deal of respect for. Let me introduce just for a second, because I know he got away, Assemblyman Aleo from the Central Valley.
Thank you. Very briefly, I just wanted to be here as a member of the Latino Legislative Caucus, expressing my solidarity. Just on the floor today, we celebrated Cesar Chavez Day, and the message there was that how different communities of color and different peoples of all walks of life have come together to address unjust laws and injustices in many parts of our country. And from the West Coast to the East Coast, we're trying to send a message that we need to address these issues. Often our youth are criminalized. Youth of color are often criminalized. And certainly we're here to raise awareness about this issue, but also that his family and that people who are standing in solidarity all across the country will know that all of us have come together to address this as legislators from different backgrounds to support this cause, and hopefully there will be justice in the end for this young man and for his family as well.
Yes, sir.
Senator Wright, are you concerned at all, because obviously this is a racial issue, are you concerned at all that the nature of your news conference here today with the hoodies and the other props might fan the flames and create a problem in Florida that could lead to more, let's say, violence?
I would hope not. I mean, one of the things that, again, I don't even want to mention his name, and I'm possibly going on a show later, but wearing a hoodie should not be an offense. This is an article of clothing. And, you know, just as we would not say that a woman who was wearing clothing of her choice deserves to be accosted or raped, I would hope that wearing a hoodie would not be something that would cause one to get assaulted or arrested or otherwise prosecuted. You know, the concern in why we were wearing the hoodie is that it became somehow when the reporter, the newscaster said that it was the fault of his parents for buying him the hoodie that caused him to be killed. Now, in many instances, you just said that's just ignorant, and why would someone do that? But this was a responsible news person who said this over the airwaves. Now, he's since retracted it, but I think he shares a view that many people have, that those black guys wear hoodies, and therefore they deserve what they got. I mean, God forbid if in this country, if we now say that what you wear gives you what you deserve. I mean, I know black guys who wear Brioni suits. What does that mean we get? I mean, at some point, there's got to be some balance. And I know white guys who might wear hoodies. What happens to those guys? I mean, we should not judge people. I mean, we had Dr. King once said that you should not be judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. I hope we've not now reduced that, so we're now going to be judged by the kind of clothing that we wear. And God forbid, again, and if we have that kind of country where what you wear dictates what you get. Now, again, I'm a member of the Senate, and the Senate has a dress code. We respect the dress code because we honor the House that we're in and the people who we represent. So recognizing that, we follow the rule of the place that we're a part of. That doesn't mean that if I'm away, if I'm walking down the street, I don't necessarily wear a suit and tie if I'm going to a social event or a sporting event. You know, and what you wear becomes your option. But even with that, I still respect the House that I'm a part of.
Is the goal from nearly 3,000 miles away in this display that you're doing to put pressure on the Florida authorities to make an arrest, or is the ultimate goal here just to draw attention that things like this are still happening?
You know, I'm not sure what the Florida authorities do, and I'm sure by now they should be embarrassed, if nothing else. I look forward to the Attorney General of the United States assuming the investigation, given that there has been no arrest or prosecution at this point, that there's sufficient evidence where it might become a federal prosecution under the criminal statutes or possibly a civil rights violation under the federal statutes. I don't have, at this point, much confidence because I've not heard from the Florida authorities what they intend to do. I know the governor of Florida has appointed the lieutenant governor to oversee a commission to look into it, but I'm not sure that that has any investigatory power or that there's a grand jury impaneled or the other things that would bring justice. So for that, I'm looking for the Attorney General of the United States to take charge because, again, I mean, Trayvon Martin was a citizen of the United States who happened to reside in Florida. So the Florida state government had an obligation to do something, but it still remains the duty of the United States to uphold the rights of each one of its own citizens, even if the state of Florida will not do that.
So you're hoping displays like these will help encourage the federal government to move forward, or is this just a general, you know, Trayvon Martin is a symbol of what's happening in this country?
Well, fortunately, the federal government is moving forward, and I spoke with members of the Legislative Black Caucus who were very instrumental in moving the Justice Department to do that. When the President of the United States made his comment about Trayvon Martin, indicating that if he had a son, his son would look like Trayvon, I commented that if I put on this hood, I could be Trayvon. And so recognizing that reality, we do have to look at the world broader. And again, I hope that the federal government assumes the role of prosecutor and allows justice to go forward for that family.
Senator Wright, a lot of people hearing this today, what your words will be moved to do something. What do you hope this might motivate people in California to do?
Well, I mean, we don't have the same kind of law about stand your ground, thank God. But at the same time, what I hope we all do is recognize that California, much like Florida, is a culture of or a state of many cultures. I mean, we have people who come here from China and Mexico and Jamaica and Africa and you name the country. I mean, in the LA Unified School District, there are over 50 languages spoken. So we clearly have a pluralistic society in California, and we want to recognize that. So what we hope people do is recognize that Everybody is entitled to his space. Everybody's entitled to worship how they want. Everyone should be entitled to love who they want. I mean, in a broad scope, we should not stereotype people and castigate them simply because we make a determination that whether it's a hoodie or whether or not it's something else that's unique to another culture. I mean, there was a gentleman shot here in Sacramento because he was Sikh and he was wearing a turban. We should not allow that kind of racism or other kind of ism to affect how we live with each other in the United States or Sacramento or California. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry.
To your question, though, it is a teachable moment. We think it is an opportunity to have the discussion, not just in legislative bodies, but in homes, in community groups or organizations, and to be sensitive that it still is an issue that we have to focus attention on. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.